The most important thing about these webinars, it gives us a very easy way to access lots of you and get messages out to lots of you, where you can see us and you can see the cut of our jib, and you can ask lots of questions in a very personal way. So we like these platforms that enable us to get information out in a way that we probably wouldn't have been able to do before. So we're very pleased with them. Right, I think we are now probably ready to start. So I will start by saying this session is recorded and will be available to view again afterwards. We have brought together a panel of people who know their stuff. First of all, I would like to introduce one of my oldest long-term relationship working colleagues, which is Annette Burgess, who I think we've been probably working together for about 12 years. All that time, Annette has been focused very much on accessibility and obviously the quality agenda. She's here today on the accessibility platform. When we were designing our version of this space, relied entirely on Annette for that information. She was absolutely brilliant. We have Diane Howarth, who owns Cottages in the Dales, another known Diane for, well, certainly a decade. Absolutely inspirational property in Yorkshire, showing you what you can do and how it doesn't have to look accessible in order to be a brilliant property. Ross Calladine is a good mate from Visit England. Welcome, Ross, to the first time you've joined us on one of these webinars. You're very welcome. And he brings all the expertise of being the head of this at Visit England. So he will be starting and telling us what it's worth. Beth Bailey, not only chair of Premier Cottages, who are great advocates of the accessibility market, and she'll explain how they do that on their website. She has a first-class accessibility business herself at Kernock Cottages. And last but not least, Robert, who sees the overview of how these kind of businesses can differentiate themselves through their USPs and move forwards and not only serve customers really well, but actually make more money doing it at the same time. And that's not vulgar. It's not inappropriate to make money by doing something properly. It really, really isn't. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Ross to tell us, what the market opportunity is here. So welcome, everybody.
That's great. Thank you very much, Alistair. Just bear with me whilst I share my slides with you. Okay. Just switching on. Okay. Sorry, this always takes a couple of seconds. Excellent. Hopefully everyone can see my slides now. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking on the webinar today with our good friends at PASC. I'm head of business support at Visit England, which is the national tourism agency. And as part of my role, I specialise in a work programme to support the tourism industry and suppliers such as yourselves to be more accessible. And I'm pleased to have the introduction today just to set the scene before we hear from some great speakers. So without further ado, I'll move forward. First of all, what is accessible tourism? It's a term we've heard bandied around. Sometimes we hear inclusive thrown in as well. But in a nutshell, it's tourism experiences that can be enjoyed by a wide range of people. And that's people with both physical, sensory, and also cognitive impairments, but also others with accessibility requirements. So we want to think very broadly when we're thinking about this market. On here, that some of the more common accessibility requirements. Obviously, people think a lot about wheelchair use, and we'll explore that. Sensory impairment, so hearing, visual in particular. People with dementia, increasingly, travelling. Other physical impairments, older people in general who may benefit from a bit more support. A bit more step-free, people with dietary requirements, range of long-term illnesses, which covers a real breadth of conditions. And then there's others that really benefit from accessible tourism, families with young children in buggies and pushchairs, they will always benefit from things like level access, and others as well. So very broad. It's officially, when you look at the government's definition of disability, it's around 1 in 5 of the UK population who meets the definition. The important thing for self-catering operators is that this may affect where people choose to stay and where they choose to visit. There's currently around 14.1 million people in the UK with an impairment. And it's important to say that the vast majority of those are hidden or invisible. So about 80% of impairments are hidden. Even though the international symbol of disability is a wheelchair, it's actually estimated that only around 9% of disabled people are wheelchair users. Now, if your accommodation can meet the needs of wheelchair users, there is a very strong business case, as their accessibility needs are typically not discretionary. You know, they have to have a certain level of accessibility to be able to go on holiday. However, if you're, and this is really key for people on the line today, if you're limited in what you can do to accommodate wheelchair users, then we want you to think about the other 91%, and we'll be giving you lots of tips and ideas on how you can still improve your accessibility. The business case. So a term that's been coined is the purple pound. It's a new term used to describe the spend of disabled people. And we know specifically in relation to tourism that people with an impairment and those travelling with them are spending around £15 billion on tourism trips in England each year. So this is not a niche market. There's already a lot of spend going on by this market, and it's broken down by those coming from abroad, which is about £500 million, those Brits taking staycations, domestic overnight trips, which is worth 3.2 billion, and day visits, which is obviously the biggest part of tourism, which is 11.6 billion pounds. And when you look at the percentages, it's only about 2% of inbound trips at the moment from those from abroad, but it's 15% of domestic overnight trips includes someone with an impairment, and 20% of day visits. This is really interesting. So domestic tourism, this is Brits taking staycations. We've seen a continuous growth of the over 55s age group since 2006. So it's grown by 45%, much bigger growth than the 16 to 34s, which has shrunk slightly, and the 35 to 54. And the significance for this market is that with age often doesn't come alone. Impairments often increase with age, and you know, those people like to take domestic trips. They like to be staying in self-catering across England. So are we thinking about making their visit to your accommodation as enjoyable and as easy as possible for them? In a nutshell, what I say to businesses is that if you look to make your accommodation more accessible, it's helping you to stay legal because there is the obligations under the Equality Act. It's helping you to make more money. Most of us are in tourism as commercial operations, and as Alistair said, there shouldn't certainly be any shame in thinking about the return from this market. And also it helps you feel good because it's just the right thing to do. You know, from a social perspective, we can probably all think of a friend or a family member with an impairment or an access requirement, and they should be able to have the same holiday opportunities as everyone else. There is an ambition that went into an important government strategy document in 2019 called the Tourism Sector Deal. And this was to make the UK the most accessible tourism destination. It was to be by 2025. Obviously, COVID, oh, sorry, I said the C word, Alistair. It may cut across that, or it will cut across that. But the tourism recovery plan is to be published this spring by the government, and we really hope it will build on the foundations of the sector deal and should still have ambitions around accessible tourism. So to set the scene for today, for any self-catering provider to become more accessible, you'll be hearing about opportunities and tips under the 3 pillars of accessible tourism. So one is things that you can do to improve your information and promotion. The other is your customer service, and as part of that, how disability aware you are and confident to welcome and liaise with disabled people. And the third is often what operators think about the most. It's the physical facilities, but they often don't have to be large, expensive changes, particularly if we're doing a new build or a new renovation. That presents a golden opportunity. So my last slide today is really where to start. We've got lots of resources on our business advice hub we've got a whole section on accessible tourism, making your business more accessible. But to pick out a few starters for 10, follow the top 10 tips. We've got some great documents. There is one specific for accommodation, one for attractions, and a general one. Follow those 10 tips as a starter. Read our introductory guide, which is called Easy Does It, which is for those really just getting started with this market. And I do have to mention the C word one more time. We have a lot of specific guidance on welcoming disabled customers when you reopen. So some of the COVID safe measures could cut across your accessibility, and there's lots of guidance available. And then finally, I'm really pleased that my friend and colleague Annette is going to be giving you tips and ideas on how to use the National Accessible Scheme later today from Visit England. So Alistair, I hope I haven't gone over my 10 minutes. Looking forward to questions later on, and all of our information on access and our tips and resources are on visitengland.org/access. Thank you.
Ross, thank you very, very much indeed. We will be taking the questions at the end, where I will direct the questions to the wider panel. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Diane Howarth from Cottages in the Dales to tell us how she has managed to not have to compromise the design of her luxury self-catering property in order to serve this market as wonderfully as she does. So without further ado, Diane Howarth, Cottage in the Dales.
Thanks very much, Alistair. I guess what I'd like to do is, through our own experiences, what we've done with accessibility, is first address some of the myths about accessibility, and then use our Cottage in the Dales cottages as really to show you the things that you don't need to compromise on the design. So I'm sure we've all been at a hotel, checked in, and the receptionist has apologised and said, "I'm sorry, we've only got the disabled room left." So usually people are disappointed, and that's the kind of image that comes to mind. But it doesn't need to be like that at all. A lot of people, probably everybody on this call, is probably thoughtful of at least one of these perceptions or myths around accessibility, and that it can't or doesn't apply to them. Be it the stairs, we've got an old building, it's all to do with wheelchairs. And it's also, from a business point of view, it looks terrible and it's expensive and it's too hard, so we're just not going there. But literally, I can address all of those in the next few minutes to show exactly what we've done. Because in our belief and our experience of what we've done with our cottages, we started simple, and literally every single type, size and quality of accommodation, no matter what it is, can provide the basic levels of accessible to facilities. And it's for mobility, visual and hearing. And you'll hear about them from the scheme from Annette shortly. And the key thing is, it doesn't need to cost any more. It is time and effort, and the help is actually out there. And it can certainly look good too. But as we started, because we didn't have anybody who's disabled in our house, you start off from the point whereby you don't know what you don't know. So a lot of people are actually afraid of doing this, but literally is the confidence comes with knowledge. So what I want to do is just spend a few minutes just to give you a case study and a look at Cottage in the Dales of what we've got and what we've done as over this last few years. And a lot more of this information is actually on our website, and we're more than happy to have a chat because we're more than happy to help other accommodation providers provide more accessible accommodation. So all three of our cottages are listed. We started simple for the two cottages which have stairs to provide the basic mobility, visual and hearing support aimed at the elderly and what we've termed the wobbly market, which includes myself, since I got a new knee. And So literally it was starting simple, and they didn't cost very much at all. It's just an extra few bits of equipment, which I'll show you a few pictures. And then later, we learned from that, we focused on the dairy, which provides the wheelchair-assisted support. And then based on the help that's out there, we found through one simple presentation how easy it was to become dementia-friendly and autism-friendly. The key thing about what we've done is, what you tend to hear a lot of the time is that accommodation is adapted for accessibility, i.e. it's a secondary thought. But what we've done is followed what's called a universal design approach, which is essentially is when we're doing something with the dairy, because we renovated what was essentially an empty building, is we brought them up alongside each other. So they're actually on a par with each other. Because you'll see when you see some of the pictures of the dairy shortly, if you then compare them with the pictures of the buyer or other one-bedroom cottage on our website, you'll see we use exactly the same equipment, all the same facilities, but it's just being able to know how to do it a certain way to be able to support people with physical disabilities, as well as making it from a standard point of view. We've termed it accessible luxury because we're at the top end of the 5-star gold market. But I say it's all of this can apply to every type and every quality out there. So consequently, by fitting it that, we've actually got the accessibility support there, which also fits in with our what we've called our luxury distinctive Dales experience. So it actually fits in with that. So there's already, I've addressed some of the actual myths. So this is the dairy, as it was, which was an empty building. And this is how it is now. And it's actually, as I say, the interior is very much based on the nearby cottage, which is where this photograph is actually taken from, literally looking at it. So it's used a lot of the same equipment, but added with a bit of knowledge and no extra cost, is we'll be able to deliver essentially the accessible cottage, which is always full, and it's won lots of awards. So just as an example, I'm going to show you some of the photos and just point out one or two of the facilities. So on the kitchen in the dairy, the kitchen on the left actually just looks standard. The only thing people notice is that the ovens are a little bit lower. But a picture on the right, you can see certain things like the space underneath the sink and the hob is suddenly empty because those particular units were on casters, which could come out temporarily or permanently for somebody being there. You can see all of the contrast in the colours, the cream, the black, the chrome, the oak, and even the line that goes round, which is a Calladine flooring, not only looks nice, but it actually helps spatial awareness. And everybody loves the hot trays underneath the oven. There's lots of other things there, but that's just a flavour. But it's all about the planning and effort and time, because we use the same people who made the kitchen in the buyer, and they've never done an accessible kitchen before. In the bathroom, it's exactly the same equipment, exactly the same style as the buyer. It's just the sinks are on 2 levels with fresh air underneath them rather than cupboards. And it's exactly the same bath, but it's just slightly lower. And that black panel in the middle, that panel comes off, and literally it allows the portable hoist to be used, so helping people get in and out of the bath in terms of those. And then the wet room, that's the one difference between the buyer and the dairy. It's a wet room rather than a walk-in shower. But again, we follow the colour contrast, which is still elegant. But it doesn't have to be plastic. In fact, you can't actually see any plastic here. The bars and rails which we've got are actually superb quality, very robust, which is what they need to be. But also, if you've got the full flexible approach, whereby on the left, all the bars have gone and they're just left with the blankets on the wall, to a shower seat, to a shower commode. So it's fully flexible for everybody's needs, even to the point where we put 2 levels of the recesses in for people using the showers. So whatever you need, it's there. But as we market it, if you don't need it, it just disappears. Similarly with the bedroom, like with a lot of cottages, they can split into twin beds. But the wardrobes here, we've actually got them, as you can see the pictures on the bottom right, is the sliding doors to reveal the integrated dressing table where the mirror slides along. You can have the stool, which is there as standard. You can have a chair which has the arms, or a wheelchair user can use it because it's got the space. And on the other side of the bed, that big armchair can disappear out, and literally there's plenty of space for a hoist, which you can see as a picture there, and the bed can be raised with the feet, all of which are just equipment we keep in the loft. Similarly outside, when we just designed the actual patio, instead of putting steps down, because we actually live on a side of a hill, it's a slope. So guests can actually easily get straight out of the lounge in the wheelchair down the slope to be able to use the patio, and we've got it accessible across the garden as well. And it's just armed with that knowledge ahead of time. Here's some examples of both the integrated facilities and the equipment. So for instance, like the hanging your coats up, somebody who's in a wheelchair can actually pull it down, otherwise you just use it as usual. And the drawers pull out, which obviously you can't quite tell there. One of the things a lot of our guests like is the, you have to provide an accessible work surface. So rather than having it permanently there, we've got it as a drawer that pulls out, as you can see, used for all sorts of purposes. It also doubles up as the ironing board, but that tends not to get used very much, of course. The two pictures of the toilets, the one on the right is the toilet at the buyer, which you just have to buy the extra equipment of a surround and what's called a toilet riser, and you keep them stored away. They cost probably about 100 quid to them together, but you can get them new on eBay, and just if people need them. And that's in the buyer because it's got the M1 mobility. And then if somebody's in the dairy and they need the shower commode chair to have a shower, it also fits across the toilet as well. But as a little hint that we were told is you make sure you get a shower commode chair which has small wheels at the back, otherwise it won't fit over the loo. And things like the bath lift, some of our guests like to try them out because they've never used one. And you've got some other pictures there, including the grab bars in the shower, where literally they're only 15 quid and they are super because they're fully flexible to use in all of the cottages in terms of put onto the actual tiles anywhere that anybody wants to suit their own individual requirements. So to finish off, as my 10 minutes is up, we have some videos and 3D tours of the dairy, including accessible versions on the website, and we've got some documents which are to be used for businesses who really are serious to wanting to know more, or you can come and visit the dairy or stay a couple of days, and we're more than happy to help other businesses provide accessible business. So you can get the help and rate the confidence, and really it is the best business decision we've ever made. More than happy to help anyone.
Diane, that was absolutely brilliant, and it really is an absolutely exceptional property. It's got more gongs than a Korean general. So you know, this gets press coverage off the Richter scale. This gets it's wall to wall. As a business proposition, she's not fibbing when she says it's the best thing she ever did. I've known her from before Diane and her partner did this, and absolutely the reason they're so passionate about it is it works. It works for the customers and it works for their bank account. So thank you, Diane. That was brilliantly succinct. Thank you. We're now going to hand over to Beth, who's going to talk about marketing. How do you market this accessible product? So without further ado, Beth, over to you.
Hi, right, I'm going to gallop through this. I've got kind of three hats on today being here. Firstly, I have an accessible, I have a self-catering business in southeast Cornwall, Kernock Cottages, which is USP is mostly dogs and hot tubs, but one of the cottages is fully wheelchair accessible. And as you know, Diane said, it's been fantastic and transformational for our business. It's by far the best income generator. I'm also the chair of Premier Cottages, and because of my personal interest in access, we have long sought to make it really easy to find accessible properties on Premier, because it's quite hard to find places to find accessible places, if that makes sense. And thirdly, not forgetting the awards. One, these are brilliant things for promoting your business, and it's a requirement of most of the awards to say how accessible your business is. So there are brilliant things to do for your business, for your accessibility, but also I've judged those for many years, including judging the access category for Cornwall and for the Southwest a few times. Inspirational look at Diane's cottage there, and going back to what Ross was saying, 1 in 5 people in the UK have a disability. But the really important thing is if you're jumping on this, and it's a really good thing to be in, please don't forget the 4 in 5 who do not. Do not embrace the access market to the point of excluding everybody else, because if your bathroom looks like this, no one's going to book their anniversary weekend away. So, you know, Diane's done a fantastic job. You wouldn't even know. Don't make the mistake of going really uber clinical unless you're going for a very, very specific, very high level of needs market. Access is personal. There is absolutely no one size fits all with it. And for that reason, you must assume nothing, and your main job in terms of how you promote your business is describing. You need to let the person with the access needs decide whether your property is suitable or not. Research shows that 84% of people with access needs find that the accessibility information on people's websites is misleading or inaccurate. Now, I found this out when I was judging the Cornwall Awards one year. There are lots of people applying for the access category, and there was a property in Devon that had described itself as very wheelchair friendly. Brother-in-law, or the brother was a wheelchair user, and this cottage was brilliant. Lots of lovely wide open spaces, wide doors. It was all perfect until, and it was all on the ground floor, until you went into the bathroom, and the shower had a 6-inch lip on the shower tray. Now, describing that as wheelchair friendly, it may well have suited the brother-in-law, but he obviously had some mobility. If you came down for a week's holiday, it's not like in the wallpaper. If you are a full-time wheelchair user and you're confronted with a shower like that, you've got no choice other than to go home. So description is absolutely crucial in access, and obviously they weren't winning many gongs that year. The other thing is, make it really easy for people to see how accessible your property is. There's a lot of properties that have good accessible features, whether they know it or not, but they also have lots of bushels that they hide their lights under. They don't actually make it really clear. You don't want people to have to hunt on your website to see if your property is going to suit them. It's really exhausting. One way of doing that is by using the National Accessible Scheme, which Annette's going to talk about, so I'm not going to bang on about it, but we at Premier Cottages, we use that as the benchmark, and we will only, for example, let you describe yourself as wheelchair friendly if you have a National Accessible Scheme grading that says you're wheelchair friendly, because otherwise people describe themselves as such, and then they've got those 6-inch shower trays. This is a really easy shorthand for people with access requirements to say, yeah, that will do what I need it to do. And have an accessibility tab on your website so that people can quickly and easily access the information. This is just really saying that, you know, the National Accessible Scheme, the reason we do it is that every category in there, it does what it says on the tin. You can imagine if you have access needs, it's quite nerve-wracking going to a facility where you don't quite know whether it's going to suit you, and you wouldn't have wanted to go to that cottage in Devon only to find out you couldn't have a shower all week. This point about this scheme is they know exactly what they're going to get, and it gives them confidence to book and return. And the thing about this market is it's uber loyal. If they come down to your accessible cottage and they know it works well for them, they will come again and again. I'm sure Diane, I know Diane has, because I know Diane, but certainly my wheelchair using guests, they come several times a year, year after year after year. So that's fantastic from a marketing point of view. By law, I think everybody is required to create an accessibility guide that you need to have on your website. This is then what people can go and look at and see how tall the beds are or the loos are and whether there's a gap under the basin, whatever it is that they need. If it's on your website, they don't have to ring you up or email you and say, have you got? So again, does what it says on the tin. The other thing that puts people off is people with access requirements often find it difficult to find out where they can go. Like everybody else, they're not booking a cottage. Nobody is booking a cottage. They're booking a holiday, and the holiday includes not just sitting in the cottage or whether the cottage works for them, but what they can do while they are with you. So I mean, the reason I won the regional and national awards in accessibility wasn't because my one single cottage was, you know, the best thing since sliced bread. I thought, well, how am I going to win with just a cottage? So on the website, I went through every single visitor attraction and put access notes on it, whether or not they were accessible. This is really important because it helps your guests plan days out. So my local pub, for example, which is on the left, they have a ramp which enables you to get into the pub. So they think that they are wheelchair accessible. So you trundle down there and you drink your 8 pints, and then you say, where's the loo? And they say, oh, well, actually, we don't take wheelchairs in the loo, which makes for a very uncomfortable journey home. So, you know, it's fine if it's not fully accessible, just people need to know that they can only have 3 pints before they need to go home, not 8. So information on pretty much everything. And the older market, the wobbly market, the, you know, as Ross said, you know, most of these most access requirements are not visible. You know, lots of older people with dodgy knees and what have you. Have a think about, you know, what kind of things they like doing. So, you know, if you look at the older demographic, a lot of them like doing things like, you know, going to gardens and garden centres and theatre and what have you. So put access notes for all those places on there. Really useful things to put on your website as well. On the left is a photograph of some fantastic equipment called trampers. It's kind of like a mobility scooter on steroids and lets you go all over the place, including on the Southwest Coast path, but they are in other areas of the UK. So links to their website, what visitor attractions have them, where guests can rent them. GP surgery is obvious, and things like holiday oxygen deliveries. I always get asked where to market your accessible property, and from my experience has not necessarily been what you would think. I think that, you know, there's a lot of, initially I did a lot of advertising on specialist websites and forums and magazines and things like that. But for most people, their disabilities does not define them. So they don't, because they're a wheelchair user, it doesn't mean they sit there all day reading wheelchair users, you know, weekly, and that's not where they book their holidays necessarily. And often they won't be the one, it won't necessarily be the one with a disability who's booking the holiday. So what has worked for me has been, in particular, Premier Cottages, because it's easy to find accessible properties on there. But, you know, general sites with really good filters, have a look at those. There are some good specialist sites, and I think the higher level of access needs, the more useful these are in a way. So websites like Accessible Holiday Escapes that won lots of awards over the last few weeks in the awards. Ewan's Guide is another one. Often those sites don't have a date search facility though, so the issue there is you tend to end up getting lots of inquiries, you know, now at the moment for July and August when they've been booked forever. So they're good as a source of information. There are also lots of specialist Facebook groups like Accessible Holiday Accommodation, where the guest will go on and say, I need something that's got profiling beds and room for a portable hoist, and you can say, I've got those things and I've got that week. Also do your own Facebook ads, and if you get it right, you will get a very high level of repeats. It pretty much sells itself. That's just a couple of Facebook groups. Blogs is another thing. Write blogs, 10 accessible things to do near you, whatever. It's good for your SEO on your website. The other two really important things in terms of the marketing are reviews. Anyway, you know, you need reviews for your business, but if for the accessible market, if you've got reviews from other, for example, in my case, wheelchair users, it gives people reassurance that your property works for other real wheelchair users. Yes, there's no one size fits all, and someone with a, you know, small manual wheelchair will navigate completely. Someone with a massive electric one, which, you know, which is kind of big and wide. But it's reassuring to know that somebody else has experienced your place successfully. And the thing that I find really useful is a 3D tour, because while photographs are great, everybody knows that the camera does indeed lie, especially with wide angle lenses. The thing about the 3D tours is you can navigate around the cottage and see exactly whether, you know, there's enough room in the bathroom for you, and how the space will work for you. So it's a really good investment, if in particular if you've got wheelchair accessible cottages. So in summary, a huge market and also a huge range of needs, and it doesn't necessarily, as Diane said, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to rebuild everything from scratch. You know, there's a huge wobbly market out there. Very loyal customers. Entry level doesn't cost very much. Do join the National Accessible Scheme. Again, you know, it does what it says on the tin. It's a great source of comfort and guarantee for guests. And the key thing really about marketing a property is don't hide your light under a bushel. Make sure it's really clear on your website what you offer. Make sure your photographs, your 3D tours, your reviews, your description in particular, you know, you need loo heights and chair heights and things like that. Make it really easy to find those so that they can easily decide for themselves whether it's going to work for them. And that's about me done. So I will now see if I can find the unshare button.
Thank you very, very much indeed, Beth. That was brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Right, we're now going to ask Annette to come and tell us about, there is a Visit England accreditation scheme for accessible properties, which gives those badges which make it very clear to the consumer what they will get when they get there. So Annette, would you like to take over the presentation?
I would, but I can't work out how to get the there it is. Forgive me, my technical abilities sometimes. There
you go. It takes.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I really do appreciate it. My name is Annette. I've had the pleasure and the privilege to work on the Visit England contract for the last 21 years. I'm very, very fortunate to have a wide knowledge on accessibility, partly from a personal basis, which got me interested in the first place, but then seeing how it could help people improve their business was really quite fantastic. I'm going to show you the logos that you've already seen today quite extensively, and this is for the National Accessible Standard. These are the main 5 that you would see. So top left, as Diane called them, Mr. Wobbly or Mr. Walkie Wounded, as I call them. The middle one is the part-time wheelchair user, because there's quite a lot of those. The top right is the full-time wheelchair user, either travelling independently or more likely for a self-catering cottage, travelling with family or a carer. And then very briefly, I'd like to touch on visible 1 and hearing 1. Very easy to do Mr. Walkie Wounded Mobility 1, which is also called One Step Ahead. I'll come on to that shortly. The visible and the hearing. There are so little things that you can do to help comply. So for instance, for the visual one, it's as simple as having your information in 14-point font. Ideally black on yellow, because black on white gives a glare and visually impaired people really struggle to read black print on white paper. Other things like having coloured drinking glasses, trying to find a clear liquid in a clear glass on a surface is really quite hard for somebody with a visual impairment. Likewise with the hearing, you wouldn't necessarily automatically think about appropriate lighting. Appropriate lighting important because they need to lip read, and it's just thinking slightly out of the box to help embrace the full size of the market. And the full size of the market is quite staggering. You know, Ross has already said, you know, 15 million registered disabled. It's a huge market worth a significant chunk of money. You've seen lots of photographs today of wheelchairs, and that's a a very important market, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about wheelchair use. But what I'd really like to focus on today is the Mobility 1 level, the Mr. Walkie Wounded, or the one step ahead, as we also call it, because that is the bulk of the market. If you look at that, 9.5 million guests fit into that category of a 15 million registered disabled people. And forget the registered disabled people, there are also a huge amount of people out there who are getting older. As somebody said, you know, age doesn't come alone, it brings lots of problems with it. So I'd like to really focus on the Mobility 1 level today. And as has been said by a number of people, guests won't go if they don't know. So if you're going to do some of this, make sure your guests know about it, promote it well. Sometimes when people start looking into accessibility, they ask for the National Accessible Standard. They then get an 88-page document come through the letterbox or on a PDF, which is really quite scary. So the Mobility 1 level, which is also known as One Step Ahead, also comes in a nice handy little leaflet, just giving 11 pages of very simple advice. And I'm happy to send either a hard copy, because I appreciate some people don't like to read on the screen, or a PDF of that leaflet if it helps. But we're going to go through some of the things that you would need to do to comply with the Mobility 1 level. As I say, 9.5 million people fit into this category. So how do we define Mobility Level 1? It's typically suitable for a person with some mobility issues, but they can actually go upstairs. So all those people that say, oh no, accessibility, it's all wheelchairs, there are 9.5 million people who can go upstairs. As long as there's a fixed rail, it can't be one of those decorative sort of rope rails that moves. It needs to be a fixed rail. Going on to the actual requirements for the Mobility 1 level, I don't think there's anything overly onerous there. Okay, no gravel on your car park if you've got parking. Things like the lever door handles. You know, if you've got spherical round handles, as I learned to my cost many years ago, people with mobility issues sometimes can't turn things, and I had to get a carpenter out on Christmas Eve to change a round handle to a lever door handle at considerable expense. Having a chair with arms, a lot of people can't get out of a seated position into a standing position without being able to push down on something. Forgive me, I work in millimeters for all of my measurements with accessibility. Unless you are a listed property with highly original features, I would suggest to you all of your doors would be over the 670, so that's not an issue. We then start getting down to rails, and I appreciate we've seen lots of pictures of rails today. I'm going to show you a couple more in a moment. So at the M1 level, the only 2 rails that you need is if you've got a shower, you need a rail in the shower, which can either be vertical, angled or horizontal, and you need a rail next to the toilet. If you've got a bath, you need 2 handles so they can help lever themselves out of it. So moving on to the accessibility guide, which has been covered by a lot of people before, please go on to the Visit England site and you'll find the accessibility guide section there. Lots and lots of help. As everybody said, if you're going to do this, make sure that people know about it and they can find the information. So everybody says to me, I don't want my bathrooms to look clinical. Well, going on to those 2 rails that I spoke about, you know, I think that rail in the shower really does look very classy and would not necessarily look like an accessible rail. As I say, in the shower, you need either a vertical, horizontal or angled rail. I always sort of push people towards an angled rail, because then whether you've got a tall person or a short person, it means that part of the rail is going to be at the right height for them. The picture on the right, forgive, I know it's got a pedal bin and we're not allowed pedal bins at Mobility 1, because obviously I'm not very good balancing on 1 foot if I've got a mobility issue, but I just wanted to take a picture of that wavy rail. Likewise, again, this is a bathroom I saw last week. The picture on the left, you know, they've got extra rails there, but they're disguising one as a towel rail for most of its life. I don't think in any way, shape or form that those look clinical. You know, people want to have a lovely holiday. They've possibly spent a lot of time in a clinical environment. They don't want to go away and look at a clinical picture. A few accessibility do's and don'ts, and I appreciate this is not only concentrating on the mobility one, this is looking at a wider range. Never ask anybody what their handicap or their disability is. As we've said, don't assume they know your property. There's nothing wrong with asking all of your guests if they've got any special requirements. They might tell you they're coming down on their wedding anniversary. They might tell you that their daughter's got a broken leg. They might then turn around and say, my father's in a wheelchair. If you've got more than one cottage and they specifically booked the level entry ground floor cottage, never move their booking without discussing it with them. And then just down at the bottom there, never touch a wheelchair. A wheelchair is actually an extension of the person. So if you're touching the wheelchair, you're touching them. Hearing impaired people quite often cup their ears because they're trying to block out some of the surround sound. It's not because they're wanting you to shout louder at them, because if you start raising your voice and shouting, that then distorts your lips and makes lip reading really hard. And never ever take a visually impaired person's arm without their permission. They might think they're being accosted. Lastly, could I just mention the Visit England Business Advice Hub again? There's a huge amount of advice on there for a multitude of things, not only accessibility. You know, you're not alone in this journey on accessibility. We are here to help you, and I will always look at plans for people who want to do either refurbishment or private building. We can avoid some very expensive mistakes at that time, and I will happily, whether you go into the scheme or not, I will happily look at your plans. And lastly, promote. If you don't promote what you're doing, nobody's going to know. I'd like to say really thank you so much for letting me speak today. I hope I haven't gone over my time. Those are my contact details. If anybody wishes to contact me, I will be delighted to speak to them. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much indeed, all the panelists. That's been really, really useful. I'm going to start bouncing some questions off you now. I'm going to start bringing Robert in. And I mean, do you see the occupancy levels and the revenue levels reflected in what people have been saying on the presentations?
The answer to that, a very quick answer to that, is yes. Occupancy levels and also the corresponding revenue for clients. We have a broad spectrum of clients using SuperControl, covering every possible kind of property, but those that I know that are specifically trying to market into the accessibility market, I can see significant occupancy levels. You know, we're talking 70, 80% or more occupancy with higher rates. So it really is a lucrative market, as we've heard.
Good, thank you. There was a question that was asked, which I know, Ross, you've answered, but to answer it to everybody who's listening, is the average length of stay. This is something that's very common, and we've seen it with our M1 property, is that people stay longer once they find somewhere. Can you give some more information on longer stays? Yeah,
I can indeed. So the average length of stay for all trips is 2.9 nights. However, for this particular market, so those with an impairment and the travelling companions, it raises up to 3.3 nights. So very much backs up what Robert's saying. The stats show that this market are likely to stay longer, and as a result, they therefore have a higher spend per trip, based on the fact that they're staying longer.
Yeah, I would just so that people didn't think that's about everybody who is looking at this market taking a short trip, that would be about all their trips that they take. So their trips that they take are about a third longer than able trips. That's what that data is saying. So they do stay longer. And I think one of the key messages that comes out from everybody I've ever spoken to in this is just how loyal these people are, once they find a trusted place that meets their requirements, that delivers, they're not looking to go anywhere else. You know, Beth talked about repeat bookings. Diane talks to me endlessly about repeat bookings. You know, this is a really, really good loyal market, and that means shoulder month bookings. This year, everybody is going to be able to do fine, but there are years coming ahead. The next 5 years, we'll all be looking to make sure that we can optimize our shoulder months. There was also a question about grants. This question gets permanently asked about, you know, trying to green your business or to make your business more accessible. What grants are available? There are no grants that we can say apply to accessiblegrants.org and you can get one, but it's always worth going and looking on council websites and LEP websites. If you're in England, local enterprise partnerships, you need to keep an eye on your local enterprise partnership grants page. There will be one. They might be called Kickstart grants. They might be called Restart grants. They might be called Investment to Succeed grants. They might be Build Back Better. They've got more catch names than you can shake a stick at. But in England, there will be the possibility of grants, certainly as the government puts money in to support the recovery post the C word. So that's a good place to look. In Wales and Scotland, they would probably be on the council sites because you don't have LEPs in Wales and Scotland. So there's a possibility of grants. What I will also say is if you're applying for planning permission and you're having trouble getting planning permission converting a property in an area because the council is saying, oh, we've got way too many holiday homes. But if you were in North Wales at the moment, probably the only way you would get planning permission would be to be able to say, we're going to deliver a fully accessible property. So you know, it can help you as well have a really good business. So there's just a couple of points there. Right, Robert, I've got another question for you that's got about SuperControl. On SuperControl, you can add the key features within the SuperControl and the kind of booking process, so they can flag up right through the booking process to see they've got key features. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. So you can flag up the features of a property, and I would highly recommend, as Beth alluded to, if you're distributing across some of the key OTAs and channels, make sure you're ticking all the relevant boxes, because those users are going to use those filters extensively. Through the booking process in SuperControl, if you have extras that are available to your guests with access requirements, then whether you're charging for them or not, then you can allow them to see and select those features, which is a really useful way of making sure that people are able to see what you offer, but also you're able to keep a stock of stuff so that you're not having to have it all in use at any one moment of time. So we see lots of clients with lists of things which they offer their guests, and they're available. So absolutely lots of opportunities to describe and offer your guests the facilities that you have available.
And that's really useful. It takes it right through the booking process so they can check.
Beyond, yeah. So in our guest login, people would be able to select extras even after they book, but before arrival. And of course, you're able to provide lots of information to all your guests right up to the point of arrival.
Great. Now, it's probably my favorite comment in every webinar we've done. I think this is webinar about 38 or something. And it's from Debbie saying, blimey, detachable rails. Do you have details, please? You bet. I mean, this is one of the big questions. People think they have to look like orthopedic rails. I'll say no more and start with Diane and then ask Beth to come in. Tell people about detachable rails.
Absolutely. I spent hours and hours at 11 o'clock at night trying to find something that looked good. And I found it in a company called Motion Spot in London. It's a set of equipment, which is a German brand, Huey, H-E-W-I, and Motion Spot are the UK distributor, and they have set up a separate arm besides their whole business is about designing accessible bathrooms and rooms. They've now set up a separate arm of their business called Fine and Able. and they've extended it even further to be able to offer these. So one, they look good, but the key thing is also what's even more important is the bits that you don't see, because this equipment has to be able to support people who are over 20 stone, say, for instance. So these bars from Motion Spot, they come off literally within 5 seconds with a click, and they go straight on. But the bit that you don't see is the 5-inch screw, which is so thick to get through the tile, to get through the plasterboard, to get into the wood, to make sure it is really secure. So it looks good, and it really is very strong. Obviously, as a result, they are not cheap. You do need to sit down because they are a bit expensive, but they last. They are very good indeed.
Beth, do you like to add to that?
Just unmuting. Yeah, there are various suppliers. I have to say I had a bit of a struggle with Motion Spot because I never seem to answer the phone. Maybe they've got better than that. I was trying to do something recently. If you have, if you want a lower cost option that you can take in and out, if you have very flat tiles, there are also some quite good suction ones. They're not anywhere near as pretty as the ones Diane's got. And, you know, if you can afford it, I would always go the Diane option because it just looks spanking and will last for years. But if you are just doing the kind of wobbly end of the market, it's always quite useful to have some you can take in and out, and they are very cost effective. Most mobility shops online will sell them, so you can just Google them.
We've actually found that some of those suction grab bars, like with old products, there's some good ones and not so good ones. The ones we have are 600 mil long, and they have the ribbing along the centre. So if your hands are wet, you've still got hold of them. And literally, they're only £15. I'm more than happy to provide the link to where to get them from. And the key thing is you can actually, as long as they're on the tiles, they won't go on an ordinary wall, but on tiles, literally you could hang from it and the tile will come off first. They are very, very good. And we supply them in all of our bathrooms, and I could make a business out of them realistically with our guests.
And the other thing is that a lot more people are now doing stuff. So, for example, I've got drop-down rails in my wardrobes, and they actually came from B&Q. So they've got a pull-down thing in the centre, a bit like the coat rack, but they're in the wardrobes. And I've got some of those curved grab bars. And I get a lot of requests from non-access guests saying, where do you get those really lovely chunky towel rails? So which just goes to show that, you know, some people don't even tweak that it's an accessible bathroom, but, you know, lots of people do them now.
Okay, I'm going to try and belt through some of the more questions. We always have somebody who's anonymous. We're amongst friends. You can say there's no prizes for anything here, but it's somebody wanting to know about incontinence and bedwetting and all the downsides of taking accessible guests. So Ross, national view on that, and then I'll come to the people who do this for a living.
Yeah, I would say tourism's about people. It's about hospitality. There are going to be groups of people that come and stay in your accommodation that don't leave it exactly how you wish it to be left, unfortunately. And that isn't always defined by age. It isn't always defined by disability. You know, you may have a group in that have a party and they make a right mess of it. Now, on the flip side, you've got some, you know, a small number of disabled people, which, you know, may have some incontinence issues. If you can manage that, then to give that person a holiday, you know, that will give you a great deal of satisfaction. It will allow them the pleasure of having a holiday. So I'd step back from that, thinking about, you know, the potential very specific issues of this market. Think how you can get around them and say, you know, and welcome that person and provide a great welcome.
Okay, Beth, what would you say? Have you had any experience of this kind of thing?
I have, and I think you know, it's all very well to say that, Ross. But the reality is that if you are an accommodation provider and someone comes and destroys your mattress, you do need to think about these things. However, it's not just disabled people that can do it. Pissed people can do it. Children can do it, and often parents don't fess up.
That was my point.
The thing to do is to make sure that you can't really go and ask somebody just because they're in the wheelchair, oh, do you wet the bed? Really do not do that. Just companies like the White Company do absolutely brilliant, non-noisy, crinkly, rubber sheety mattress protectors, which are fully waterproof. They won't know you've got a mattress protector on, and that way, they're quite expensive, but they're definitely cheaper than getting a new mattress. Then you don't have to have arguments with the guest about, you owe me £1,000 for my Hypnos mattress, and do be cognizant of the fact that people might have accidents, and the last thing they want to do is to be, they will be mortified. So just make it really easy. And if you, I've had quite a few people with paraplegia or whatever staying, and I just normally ask them if they would like a supply of spare sheets. It removes the embarrassment. And if you resolve the issue before they arrive, it just takes the worry for you out of the equation, and it takes the embarrassment for them out of the equation. So it's just about handling it and thinking ahead.
Okay, Diane?
Yeah, it is following on from what Beth says, is for each changeover, especially if somebody is disabled, we don't ask them because you're not allowed to, but what we provide in a plastic bag now, a zip plastic bag because of the COVID, is an extra set of towels and a full set of bed linen. So if they do have an accident, they can manage it and they can put the stuff in the washer themselves and still have it all there. So it's helps them, and we have layers on the bed of a topper, plastic sheet, and then a mattress protector before we even get to the bed linen, because as you say, those mattresses are very expensive. But even like we've got the Super King bed, when we've changed them, we've actually now got zip and link, so if by any chance it does still get damaged, there's only one half has got damaged. So it is easily manageable. It really is. And
we have a very large property. Our target groups are 20 to 32. Gosh, we've been closed for so long, I've forgotten how big our bookings are. The potential for disaster of allowing 32 people into a property is enormous if you don't go through various steps to manage that in advance. And I think that, the better that we manage with our guests, we communicate with our guests up front and explain to our guests what we've got. That's the way to deal with these kind of issues up front, which I think, in short, is what people were saying. There's a lot of questions coming through asking whether it's possible for someone to come out and assess the property to look at what you may or may not be able to do. I'm going to say on behalf of Annette, before I pass over, she's not going to drive from one end of the country to the other end of the country for nothing to look to see if you can convert your property. The best possible thing you can do is download those guides and have a look, and then think about it, and then perhaps ask Annette. So rather than you having to say no to the impossible, Annette, I've sort of answered it, but tell now to people what you can do to help people.
So I'm quite often used to looking at plans for people, be it of a single bedroom, a single bathroom, or a whole property, and I'm happy to do that over the email and talk it through. People ask if they can have an advisory assessment under the accessible scheme. I'm aware for those people that are star rated, they know we come out and give advice on how they can improve their property. And that's a very low cost option to have an advisory visit. Sadly, under the National Accessible Scheme, we can't come out and do an advisory because we actually have to physically measure everything. If you've got 4 walls and nothing inside it, we can do it all off plans over the email. If you've got a property that you want to convert, I will happily come and do all the measurements, but we would charge for a full visit. We can't just do it on advisory. And I should say that the visits last for a period of 3 years. It's not an annual participation, it's every 3 years, because once you've got your building, you don't tend to move walls or change doorways or alter rails, etc. People say, oh, well, I don't want you to come because there might be something missing and you'll fail me. We're not like driving instructors. We're there to help and we're there to reassure. And if it's something as simple as a flip top bin, and you've got a pedal bin instead of a flip top bin, I would say to you, would you change this? And if you say yes, then we move on. If it's something, for instance, your doorway is not wide enough, then obviously we've got a bit of an issue, and we can't go with that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's good. Charlie and Julia have asked a question, I know them well, Ross, whether Visit England have any influence on planners or advice for planners on trying to get perhaps an accessible property.
Short answer is no. Unfortunately, planning is a big beast. Much of planning is defined locally by local plans. I've had lots of conversations with self-caterers in different districts across England, and commonly there are frustrations with the planning system, but the rules and the transparency of what's acceptable in one district can be hugely different to the next. On the plus side, I do know of properties where the planning system has asked about accessibility, and there's a property in the Peak District National Park where they were prompted that they hadn't even crossed their mind about the accessible tourism market. When they looked at the planning permission, there was a specific question that said, what are you doing to make this development of self-catering cottages accessible? That was the driver for them to really go down that route fully and have fully accessible cabins, and then it helped them to secure the planning permission. So I know there are instances where it can help you to get planning permission, but there is no one consistent set of asks or requirements when it comes to accessibility from a planning perspective. It would depend on your local plan and your local district.
Can I also make a comment on that point as well, Ross? Is we found is the planning officers do not have a knowledge of the accessible requirements, and we have it in writing from our planning department, is that accessibility does not have a bearing on planning law. We accepted that first time round and found out later that they were totally wrong, and we only got permission for the dairy because it was accessible to the Visit England National Accessibility Scheme standards, because for the very reason Alistair said before, is we've already got enough quantity in the Yorkshire Dales National Park. But even now, 3 years after we launched the dairy, we are still the only accessible accommodation.
There's no doubt it would help get planning permission.
Absolutely.
That's the planning officer is living on planet Zog. The government has got a low carbon agenda. It's got an accessible agenda. All of the new plans that come out post the C word will feature access for all, will feature low carbon. So a really good business plan is to have accessible self-catering holiday cottages with electric vehicle charging outside. You're going to be very busy if you offer that over the coming decade. So things like gravel outside the property is a question about what kind of beds to make sure that hoists can come under. Diane, do you want to have a go at that kind of thing?
I was just starting to respond to Susan, because she's been in touch with me directly in the last couple of weeks, literally regarding the gravel. We started off with all gravel outside of the dairy, the whole courtyard was. So we actually, yes, we recovered all of it, but what you need is to be able to get from the cottage outside to the car, or however they're going to access the car, which might be side entrance or back entrance to the car, and also out onto the street. So you've got to be able to put some flags down for them to be able to get around. No problem at all from that point of view. Also putting down, making a level area immediately outside the cottage so they can park the car, unload, and let the other person move the car. But some people are travelling independently, so you've got to be able to allow for that as well. That's depending on what rating you're actually going for. The portable hoists, they come apart. We keep everything in the loft. People book in advance. We talk them through what they want. We confirm it in writing. all the equipment's on our website so they can see and got the descriptions with it, and therefore we confirm it in writing and it's set up in advance, but it's all stored away, out of the way when it's not needed.
I think it's also worth saying, because there was another question on there about someone needing to hire in beds and special beds. You can enable people to give links to mobility hire shops and enable them to hire them in at a cost. You don't have to have a whole other building full of mobility equipment. It is worth having a look there if you do get a lot of people with access needs, because a lot of them are really expensive to hire. So things like riser recliner chairs are about 150 quid a week. So if you've got guests coming for 2 weeks, which I had last year, who's going to come and spend 300 quid hiring in a riser recliner, it's almost worth doing the sums. And, you know, as Diane says, you can get these things secondhand on eBay. And if you've got storage space, you can charge for it, or you could, you know, offer it for free as an extra. But
we now actually
to pay for them.
Yeah, we actually now keep the rise recliner armchair in the dairy permanently, because yes, it is heavy. It is a top of the range HSL Linton, or Ascot as they're called now. And yes, they retail for nearly £2,000, but you can get some perfectly good ones on eBay for 350 to 500 quid. And we bought 2 of them since then, to the point whereby people without accessibility requirements who are staying in the dairy, the husband and wife, say, for instance, are fighting over who has the recliner chair because it's so comfortable. In terms of doing that. And we bought also an electric profiling bed from eBay for £300, and it paid for itself within 1 booking.
I would just say on the riser recliners, if you get a lot of kids staying, it's a bit of a risk leaving them in the cottage. They are a pain to get out because they are heavy, but you will find that the kids use them as kind of fairground attraction.
Yeah, luckily we're just couples. Yeah.
Most necks of the wood do have hire shops, and you know what we've done where people have wanted this special equipment is we put them in touch with a hire shop. They have ordered what they have wanted to come from, so they've specified it. Goodness me, they know more about it than Lorna or I do, and that's been delivered, and they paid for the kit separate to the transaction with the holiday cottage. It's been delivered, it's been collected. These are well organized businesses. This is what they do into care homes, into holiday cottages, into hotels, and that's worked really well, so that we don't actually have to have this huge raft of equipment here for occasional use. If you went full time, full access, you probably need to have more of the kit available yourself. Ross, you had.
Yeah, Alistair, if I could just add, because it is really important that you don't fall foul of the Equality Act, and the Equality Act makes it very clear that operators are not allowed to charge for reasonable adjustments. So if you purchase any equipment to make a stay more accessible for someone, that could be deemed under the legislation as your reasonable adjustment. So you'd be getting into sticky ground. We've had this confirmed by EHRC if you were to charge for that equipment. So I think invest in the equipment you're happy to provide free of charge, and anything that's over and above, you do what Alistair says and you signpost to hire shops, and then you know you're not going to fall foul of that part of the legislation then.
There are a lot of questions on here about hoists at the moment. None of our local mobility hire shops will do hoists because they say for them it's an insurance risk. You have to, because there are lots of different types of hoists and they may not be suitable. So I don't know if either Ross or Annette have got any further information on that, or maybe Diane has.
I've just answered somebody.
Hoist, there can be, you know, are you potentially putting yourself in an impossible insurance position?
I just answered somebody that question directly. We were directed, as you look online at the medical care websites, you can see which are the portable hoists that they use for care homes and for other things. So you can see the different ones, and that's how we were directed. And there are actually a number of operators who actually do refurbished ones, and therefore they're done properly. So we got ours actually on eBay from a guy in Rotherham, and he refurbishes lots of accessible equipment. So that's how we found out about it. So we know it was the right model to go for because it also comes apart easily as well.
I would say though, do check with your insurer always.
Yes.
We were looking at getting the hot tubs accessible because we get a lot of the our wheelchair using guests kind of complain that they can't use the hot tubs. But our insurer would not insure us for providing hoists for the hot tub. So just make sure any of that kind of kit that you check with your insurer.
That's a really useful point. I would just add that there is a severe shortage of visitor accommodation with ceiling tracked hoists. Obviously, this is for a certain segment of the market which have very higher level accessibility needs. If you have the opportunity and you consider that, there would be a very strong business case there, because the group that needs, that just can't travel without hoist facilities have a very limited pool of accommodation to choose from at the moment.
Okay, I'm going to come in there. I was introduced to somebody called Charles Van Beckel, who has a child who needs all of this kind of stuff and found it very difficult to do stuff. And I think he has a group called Able Stays. Is that the right?
Yeah, Able Stay.
I spoke to him at length on the phone. Absolutely inspirational man. He's buying a bungalow in Worcester Park in southwest London to convert to do this, because there is nowhere for families with a disabled person to be able to go in London that has these kind of facilities. I can tell you he's not going to need to advertise that property very extensively. It's going to work wall to wall. And all those features are then included, so it doesn't come under the Equality Act stuff, because it's charged in the package of the property. So you do it right first time is the rule for all self-catering, every aspect of it. Do it right first time, invest in the right stuff, and you'll get dividends. So
there's definitely a market for very specialized properties, because as Ross says, there's hardly any. When I was judging the tourism awards, there was a fabulous place in Bournemouth called Bod Bournemouth, which was specifically adapted. It was very highly adapted. It had those Japanese wash your bum loos and everything, but they had bookings, solid bookings, 12 months of the year, 3 years out. It was always full. So if you fancy doing a new cottage and want it to be full all the time, then go very high end, ceiling hoist, the whole thing. Don't worry about putting off the Valentine's Day brigade, because they won't get a look in. It will be full for the next 3 years.
There's a wonderful development opening on a lake in Cornwall, which is going to be a specialist in accessible holidays and water sports, accessible water sports holidays. So these people are doing their research and they're finding there are great opportunities to do this. I'm going to just have to give a tiny little bit of bad news, though. Anybody who is still on a site called disabledholidays.com, it's a small OTA for disabled holidays. It's gone. I don't know anymore. I didn't know about them before. I don't know if anybody on the call knows any about them. Ross, you're nodding. Have you heard any more?
Yeah, they were listed in our accessible marketing guide called Speak Up as a specialist channel. The statement on their website says due to the pandemic, they've had to cease trading, unfortunately.
So if that's, do let us know if that's affecting any of you. I had some questions in before the webinar. I'm just going to quickly drop a couple of those in now. Ross and Annette, are fire safety regs any different for accessibility properties? I mean, I've never read they are, but have you ever heard that they are?
There is a document that we signpost to that's specifically about making sure that you've done a risk assessment in relation to disabled visitors. Right. I can share the link with you after on that, Alistair.
Yeah, I'll put it in the PASC newsletter, and then people perhaps can go that way.
I mean, I would just say, I won't spend long on this, but it's more for hotels. I find they have something called a PEEP, which is a personal evacuation plan. I've missed one of the E's out. And the idea there is that the person with accessibility needs would agree with the hotel, their individual evacuation plan. But I think that's more for bigger, more serviced accommodation. With regards to a single self-catering cottage, I don't think you need to have an evacuation plan. But you should certainly look over this guidance to check you're thinking about any different requirements for disabled people's evacuation.
Okay. There's a question just come in about recommending attracting visitors for overseas. Well, this year that's not probably going to happen. So you've got perhaps a little bit more time to plan for this. I'm not. My knowledge base doesn't tell me websites to get foreign accessible visitors. Does anybody have any experience of any sites that are good at getting international accessible visitors to come?
Well, the one I would plug here for obvious reasons is Premier Cottages, not least because they have 3 full foreign language websites, one in French, one in German, and one in Dutch. So that's where I get mine from. I get a lot of German visitors.
Okay. I've just had one here. Someone say, I don't know. I'm not recommending, but I'm not recommending. I've had a question in from an access consultancy called Access for All UK. Nodding. That's approval rating going up by the second.
Absolutely, double
Yeah.
rating. Yeah.
So I'll put a link to Access for All in the next PASC newsletter to follow up on this. I'll just screen grab that. So I've got that. So thank you, Gillian. The opportunity for this market is very, very large. We've seen today that nothing's easy. If you want to make a more successful business, you're going to have to work at it. So yes, there are questions, there are challenges. It's everything from the gravel to the hoists are still issues that you have to address, but they're all addressable. And you take a common sense approach to most of it, and you're going to get a common sense answer. I can say, having worked with Annette on getting our large property is ready to go wheelchair accessible. There's been an interruption over the last year. I can't think what that might have been to stop that happening. This is a great business opportunity, and it's been great to have around 100 of you on today thinking about it. Even if every single one of you did this to the fullest extent, it still wouldn't go anywhere near meeting the demand that's available for this out there. I think that's the point. People think it's hard, and when people think it's hard, not many people do it, and then those that do it well get all the benefit. So do take what you've heard from this thing. You've got the contact details of everybody on this webinar. If you haven't, you can just drop me a line and I'll introduce you. They will help you. They're there. Visit England have a fantastic resource. The accessible scheme is a fantastic resource. Diane has reached out to you to say that she can help you. We've had Access for All come on. So ask those people the questions. Invest. This will give you shoulder month cover. This will give you really, really, really good business going ahead. So once again, thank you all very, very much for joining one of the PASC SuperControl webinars. Thank you very much to Robert for hosting, and we wish you all well with the reopening. If you're in England, soon. If you're in Wales, it might be sooner, but to whom? And in Scotland, it might be a bit later, but who to? So as soon as we can give you detailed guidance on when you can all trade properly, that comes out every Friday in the free PASC newsletter. Thank you all very much indeed. Take care.